And people are like, yeah, but what if they explode? What if my manager get upset? Whatever. And I'm like, you're already in a point where you're blocked, right? That's always that's the trick for people. Is like, that's why you came to me, because this is not working what you're currently doing. So at least you're breaking the cycle.
What do you think of as the engineering mindset?
Well, based on our conversation where it came up, I guess it's about this attitude of jumping right into things, at least in my perspective, and tackling the problem head on. It's kind of not going around, not thinking too much about it, unfortunately, and kind of jumping into the problem and trying to see how you can address it, and starting from the middle. So I think, yeah, for me, that's kind of the engineering mindset of focused on like solution oriented more than anything.
And is that a good or a bad thing? What do you think?
A good or a bad thing? Well, I think it depends on at what stage it is. Let's put it like that. I do think that the popular opinion about the engineering mindset, or how engineers are tackling a coding or a problem, it's more about jumping straight into coding. Just jumping right into, okay, what's the best tool to solve this? Playing with different types of solutions. I do think that it's not very efficient in the long run. Maybe in the beginning, when you're starting out, in order to keep the motivation and the excitement, it's very helpful and useful. But when you're part of a team, when you're actually trying to build something, I think you need that extra level of interest into why are we building this, like how can we make it better, taking a step back and actually thinking about the problem you're trying to solve. If there's a better way, maybe even without using coding to solve it. I've been there a lot of times, and kind of just asking these questions outside the box before jumping straight into coding.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think it's a very big temptation, as you say, to jump straight into coding. Go, hey, we need to solve that. I know we need to do this calculation. I write some code. With less of a temptation to go, well, why do we need to solve this calculation? What is the benefit of doing it? How is the business, the organization going to be better off from that? Is there an alternate way? So yeah, I think it's got pros and cons, hasn't it? It's great that we jump to solving the problem. It's great that we have that problem-solving approach, but sometimes we could do with pausing and saying, well, let's ask a few more questions first. Let's figure this out. Let's work out where we go. So have you got any ideas, or have you taken an approach that's helped you kind of pause and ask those questions a bit better before diving into the code?
Yeah, I mean, I think what got me into this mindset, into the asking questions before jumping in mindset, was more of a need than necessarily an internal desire to go beyond. I think you get at some point in when working with your team, or after you've solved a couple of problems, where you just feel like things like jumping in straight into a problem, it just doesn't work necessarily as good anymore, right? So it's like, maybe you find a better solution of doing things after, or someone else around you ask the questions that you haven't asked, and then you start thinking, oh, maybe they have something here. So I think it's about keeping that curiosity on actually listening to people around you, and actually starting to understand, okay, what's the reasoning behind their questions. That's what did it for me. I think other people influence with more experience, that were basically, they went through the pain themselves, and that kind of showed me the value of going beyond. And I think once you do that, you can never go back. Like once you start asking the questions, once you start getting curious, once you find your first like feature or problem you solve without coding, or using like less code, or like a very simple solution that you would never thought of if you would just stick to jumping right in, I think you get addicted to that. I think, right? So I think it's a process, but it's very much starts with having people around you, or having, I don't know, reading it in some book, or something that kind of triggers your curiosity to go in that direction. At least that was it for me. I'm not sure if you had a different experience that made the switch.
I think most of my experience came from early in my career where, again, I got into software engineering because I wanted to code. So I, just like everyone else, I jumped into code. And I think after a little while, an example that probably stands out to me is one of my first businesses where it's like, hey, we're going to build this thing. Be awesome. Going to build all these features. I think they're perfect, brilliant. Then nobody used them. And it was, I didn't pause and say, well, actually, what do most people do? What do they want? What is the problem that they're trying to solve with this bit of software? Instead, I'd thought of, hey, these are all the clever, cool things that we can do that I think would be really useful. The reality is people didn't use them for that. And when I then learned a little bit more about sales and running a business, I came across this story, which I don't know if it's true, of the space race. And there was a claim that the Americans wanted something to light in space, so they spent a long time, and $1 million, it's claimed, inventing a pen that would light in zero gravity. The counter-argument was that Russians just decided to use a pencil. And I think, whether it's true or not, that's a good story to illustrate that if you step back and say, if you take the problem as it's presented, we want a pen that lights in space, you go off and do a bunch of research, and blah, blah. If you say, well, why? Why are we solving this problem? What's the end goal? What are we really trying to achieve? Oh, we're not about light. Okay, well, if ink doesn't work in space, what about a pencil? What about a crayon? What about something else? We could explore the solution space a lot more, and that I think is missing a lot of times. I guess it's missing also from this AI is going to light all the code. It's like, well, great. Lighting the code is a long way down the chain. It's not going to light all the code for very many different reasons, but even then it's a long way down the chain. There's lots of other things we've got to do first that everybody forgets. Yeah, absolutely. Cool.
On that point, just I think that's a great way to learn that lesson, because you mentioned when you're trying to build your own thing, or you see the direct impact the code or what thing you're building has on users. I think that's when you really clicks, when you have that first feature that you see no one is using, or yeah, like something that doesn't really bring value, or that your users are completely using it differently than you intended. I think that can definitely make the click. But in a like when you're trapped in a project in a bigger space or a bigger company, I think it's harder to get that connection with the actual impact of your code or of what you're building with your users, with getting like real feedback. And I think that's key in developing that engineering mindset that we're talking about before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's been a problem with our industry, in that we seem to have missed with Agile. Agile was all about getting closer to the customer, embed the customer in the team. Instead, we seem to have created these extra roles that sit between the team and the customer. So instead of the customer being part of the team and their day-to-day and in the trenches with the people doing the work, we've now got a product owner and a scrum master and maybe a product manager and a chain of people, putting you even further in the customer. And I think that's a big mistake. And it's one of the things that's gone along with all this certified and structured and formal Agile. It kind of misses the point of what Agile should have been, or should be, or what the Agile Manifesto preaches. Which again, I was very lucky early in my career because I worked for a software consultancy building software for customers, and several of the projects I worked on early days were fairly small. And so even as a junior developer, and one of them, I was the only person on the project. So back in the day, I picked up the phone and spoke to the customer. What do you want it to do? And I had that all the way through. I worked at an early ISP, and I was sat on an IRC channel for most of the day talking to the customer, and the customer's going, hey, can I have... In those days, it was, can you make my website look like, what's the film, The Net, I think.
That's very specific.
Yeah, it was a big film at the time, I think, with Sandra Bullock. And that exposure to talking to the customers was very useful, and again helped when I then started my own business, and I was talking to the customers quite regularly. And as you say, when you see the consequences, when you're paying the bills, when you're thinking, how am I going to eat this month? How am I going to pay my mortgage? It focuses the mind in a different way and how important it is. What I think is also interesting is I saw a post on LinkedIn this morning, I think, pointing out that somebody didn't want to hire software engineers from consultancies. They wanted software engineers from real product companies that understand building products. And I thought, from what we just said, that actually I think is the wrong way around. Because when I worked for consultancy, I talked to customers day in, day out. I had that direct relationship. I had to be presentable to the customer as well. Back in those days, I had to turn up in a suit and smart and be articulate and so on. Well, a lot of product engineers, as you say, they're several layers removed from a customer now. So actually, that relationship is the long way around, that the product people aren't getting that exposure in a lot of companies to the end user and figuring out what they want. You've worked for consultancy as well. Have you had the same experience, or is your experience different to mine?
I mean, so first, I'm surprised to hear that. A little bit, but not so much, unfortunately. I think there are different biases people have out there based on their previous experience or what they heard from people. I think it's a shame. I think they're missing out on some great candidates because of that straight on like bias or elimination criteria. Let's put it like that. Yes, I also work in a consultancy, and like you, I think it was. I mean, definitely was one of the best experiences for defining my career. Exactly as you said, it was exactly the same. Like I had to work with the client every single day, facing the client. The project manager was from the client, so they were involved daily in our work. And like of course, like everything was your work is constantly visible, right? It's not like you're just everything you have to explain why you're doing what you're doing, what's the value, how much is going to cost, right? Things that you would not worry about, I think, in a product company or maybe if it's a startup, but usually you don't worry as much, right? Other people do that for you. So yeah, I think for me it's. I mean, I don't know. There is an idea, or some people have this misconception about consultancies, that maybe like people don't develop as high quality of a code that you would do in a product company, because if you're in a product company, there is this idea that you really believe in what you're building. And I mean, I worked in consultancies and I really liked what I was doing. I'm also a very volatile person, so I would adapt. I'm driven by getting things done and solving problems more than whatever it is that we're building. I think everything contributes to something. But I think there is this misconception that ruins people's perception. I do think in consultancy, I mean, you have opportunities that you don't have in product companies. Like I could change teams every year, for example. I could change clients. I could change industries that I was working on, problems that I was solving. People would move around very quickly in the team, right? Which required faster growth and faster adaptation. Collaboration was something that you couldn't just, get used to it. You would have to constantly work to have a team that kind of works together, because every new joiner in a team, it's a new team. It's just that, right? And I was also leading teams in a consultancy, and I have to say, like for me, it was like I was a tech lead, but I felt like I was doing the job at least of an engineering manager, because it wasn't just the technical side or the people side on my team. It was all of this client stakeholder management, constantly dealing with all the things that I mentioned before, that usually you don't even think about in a product company at that level, right? And yes, so I think it's a shame not to consider people based on this criteria. And I think at least you should have a conversation and trying to understand, okay, what the experience they gain and how it would match on what you need, and you might be surprised on how it can complement the team that you currently have.
Yeah, absolutely. My experience was the same. A couple of the consultancy I worked for, some of the projects range from 7 days to about 6 months. So you'd go into a new code base, you'd go into a new bunch of people, you'd have work where you were doing pre-sales work, you'd then be involved in, getting the contract across the line. You'd go and do the initial fact finding and start the work, and then you'd eventually deliver a product. And so you're exposed to all parts of this, as you say, all the different things like stakeholder management, solutions engineering, sales, and helping with that. And then the interesting thing you said about quality, that actually made me reflect that my experience of consultancies, and I worked for a couple of different ones, including my own, and my experience of product companies has been that there are companies that produce terrible code, there are companies that do terrible work in both sides, and there are companies that do great work on both sides. It doesn't matter whether it's consultancy or product company, it matters on the culture, the environment, the focus of the company, the life stage, the reputation, and even the people. I mean, some consultancies I worked on one team where they produced great output because it was a stunning great bunch of people. Another team where the output wasn't as good because it was a different group of people with different skill sets. And some of the bigger consultancies, for example, those teams were sometimes experts, and sometimes we were just thrown together from, oh, these people off charge will throw them together, and the quality would vary even then within the same company. So it's, as you say, there's a lot more to it than that. It's a very, very narrow and biased view, and it would be better to look at people individually and see what skill sets they bring and what they can bring that might help.
Exactly. I mean, it's a shame on both sides, right? People are missing opportunities, and you are missing an opportunity as a company to develop and actually get some great people. But it's what
And the
it is.
crazy thing is, we talk about diversity and how valuable that is for building your team. And that's part of diversity as well. What different backgrounds, what different experiences, what different things have people been exposed to? Is that, if you get everyone that's from a product company and everyone that's worked from Google, you're only going to get people that have learned to build a product in Google's way. You're not going to get that diversity of thought. You want that different experiences, and they will expose you to different things. And again, for me, that was actually something I loved about consultancies, and that in 1 year in a consultancy, I configured firewalls, I racked servers, I wrote C code, I wrote Java code, I wrote TCL, and probably a couple of other languages that I've forgotten, and did all these different things. And you say that experience of learning to ramp up quickly on something, get up to speed on a new domain, it was so useful, and I really enjoyed it. I like the diversity of it. I like the different things that I could do. Didn't always enjoy all of it. I mean, racking servers is going to get a bit dull after a while when I want to write code, but for a couple of days it was kind of fun. And in the heat of summer in a UK office that wasn't well air conditioned, the server room was nice and cool. So it was a bit different.
Actually, I had the same experience when I joined ThoughtWorks in here. They were just opening an office. So actually, one of my first tasks were to set up a Raspberry Pi, so we are able to see our dashboard, like with metrics and everything on a monitor, on a screen. And I remember that because like that was the first thing, like, okay, set this up. I'm not sure you have this here, you have that. We had to do everything, like connecting the keyboard to the setup and everything. And it's I mean, this is just one example, but like you said, I think you get exposure to a lot of different things that you would not have in a very controlled structure environment. It's kind of like you have to get out of that comfort zone and you have to kind of solve things. But it very much relates also to your style. I mean, it sounds like you're the same, but I'm also I cannot stand in the same place. Kind of, I like diversity of the activities that I'm doing. So I think it's also a way of keeping people engaged, and that's how you develop also that mindset, of that open mindset, where you're starting to ask questions because you get exposed to different things. And I think it's a missed opportunity to not tap into that market.
Yeah, and the flip side of that, I had a similar experience to you with the Raspberry Pi, and I joined, I'm going to call it a startup for lack of a better word. It was a company that had gone bankrupt, been acquired out of bankruptcy, and then had an injection of a couple of million in cash to get going. The two founders were there, and I was hired as the founding engineer of the kind of reboot of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And with this injection of cash from this company that acquired them, we were acting like a startup and getting going. So I was there as founding engineer, and we didn't even have an office when I was hired. So I was writing code and helping look for an office. Then when we got the office, we had, I don't know what it's about, 6,000 square feet of office space empty. And I'd ordered the computers, so I'd helped specify what servers were getting in the server rack, and this thing turned up. But it was going to be there 3 weeks before we could get desks and chairs. So for 3 weeks, I sat on £100,000 worth of servers, still in the Dell boxes, and built a desk out of out of the server rack with a monitor stuck on top of it, my laptop next to it, and sat on £100,000 worth of Dell servers that I didn't unpack. So I kind of enjoyed that. That was a completely different experience, and you're not going to get that in a big enterprise. It's a bit of fun and different, and I enjoyed that. That diversity is good fun. Cool. So you mentioned being an engineer manager, therefore, and I picked up something on your profile that you mentioned you went from tech lead to product director in 3 years by focusing on the non-technical skills instead of technical skills. I'd love to hear a bit more about that, Anemari.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the journey that I had from going from the technical side to the non-technical side, it's been an intense one, but definitely a worth one. I started getting very much onto the people side in tech when I started preparing for becoming a tech lead. So very early in my career, when I realized this other side of engineering that we are talking about, on how are we building things, why are we building things, how can we build them faster, I became very passionate about the topic. And I realized that the way that I can have that impact in the team, it's by, at that point, becoming a tech lead. And so I started growing the direction. That's the reason I came to Spain to join Totros, because they built like a growth plan for me into that role. And when I started preparing for becoming a tech lead, I discovered this part of focusing on people and how important it is. Everything that it comes from. Why are we? What problems are we solving? What is the motivation behind it, like people's motivation for building this, for engaging, for creating like the problem that they were solving. And so I started putting more and more effort into this. And I, like you said, because we're talking before about the experience of a consultancy, I kind of had to do a lot of different things that you don't normally do in just a like senior engineer role, and so I focused. I was doing everything mostly when I also became a tech lead from the big from in I would call it inception. Like it was this part where you would go in and define the product together with the client, with like the sales team, like everything, things that I'd never done before, right? So for me it was very exciting. But and I started seeing more and more the value, and I started being more and more involved in everything. So that means that in a couple of years I was exposed to the designing of a product, to the building of a product, to the deployment at all the levels. Like at that point, it was 5-6 years ago, we had like a complete continuous delivery pipeline. Everything was going directly to production. At that point, it was state of the art. I think for some companies, even today, would be state of the art. But it was really cool to see kind of all of these steps and stages. Besides, there was the stakeholder management, the continuous exposure to the client. I was doing interviews. I was also part of the interviewing process and bringing people into the company. And I was training people. Like I started training tech leads the moment when I became a tech lead, and I was very like motivated and curious of it. So what I'm trying to say is that I got a lot of exposure. I was also involved in like people performance reviews, because in a consultancy, we as a tech lead, you are doing all of this. We didn't have an engineering manager, right? It was just you and the client, and that was it, right? So you had to kind of manage everything. You had some people internally, but they were like on the outside. And so what I'm saying is that after this role, when I went into the product director role at Codop, which is a startup, basically I realized I have way more experience than what the tech lead role entitles usually, right? And so all of that experience helped me to jump into a role that was like, it sounded more unreachable. Let's put it like that. And I think it's also important to understand that roles mean different things in different companies, right? So and in a startup, like you go up the ladder faster, or like things are developing in a different way. So I think if you're I like to look at career progression more as like what you're learning, what you're getting, where do you want to get, more than roles. Because I realize that, like I said before, roles are very different from company to company. And if you want to get into a specific role, it's just a matter of changing the context. Maybe like in a different company, or the skills that you've been developing, they can match on a different role, on a higher level. Or and yeah, for me this was it. Like I had, as I said, I had an intense exposure to a lot of different things, a lot of things that weren't coding, right? Like all the things that I shared were about process, or about delivery, were about collaboration, interaction with people, making your work visible, building a high performing team, which we were at that point. And not so much on, okay, what's the best tool to solve this? Like tech was still a big part of the role, but not, I had a lot of people around me to take ownership of that and move things forward. So I could focus on all of the other things. And this allowed me to easily jump into a product director role in a startup, and kind of build things from the ground up, and build a team, and run all the processes around it. So yeah, this was the journey.
Cool. It sounds like a fun and exciting couple of years, and it's given you
and
then this
intense.
basis. Yes, indeed. And it's given you then this basis to broaden out and focus a bit more on the soft skills. So, what is your main focus these days?
So currently, I mean, I discovered in this journey, I discovered the passion I have for growing people, and for like specifically growing like people in tech into leadership position. I think there is a gap in the market. Like you're growing a lot of an individual contributor as a senior, you're developing, and then there is this switch on leadership, which can be in different ways, tech lead, staff engineer, and I see a lot of people struggling. You have a lot of resources and a lot of information out there on one or the other, like even the information that we have on tech leads or on engineering leadership, it's kind of always said from a perspective where you're already made the transition, where you already know the rules, right? So what I'm focusing on and I'm very passionate about, it's kind of that gap when you're switching and jumping from a senior engineer to a tech lead or a staff engineer into a more people focused leadership position. And the reason why I'm so like motivated or curious about it is because I know how hard that transition was for me, and I would love to help others to have that transition way easier. Like I literally burn out in the role when I started, and I think there are ways to do that easily, way easier than I did. And so currently, I'm for the past 4 years, I've been focusing mainly on working with senior engineers and tech leads and engineering managers in managing their day-to-day their today craziness of the role and transitioning onto this people side and building high performing teams. That is to coaching, like individual coaching, group coaching, and training. So I train groups of tech leads. Usually I go into a company and I have a group of tech leads, and I train them on soft skills, on communication, collaboration, and how to basically build high performing teams, and what does that mean besides building great code. So that's basically my focus.
So, what is the biggest problem that people have making that transition? What's the number one stumbling block you come across?
I think the first one is accepting that it's a different role. So I think it's accepting that the things that they've done until now, the skills that they've been developing, are not the skills that are gonna move them forward. For example, there is still a trend in the tech industry that very good techies are promoted into this leadership role, right? And they struggle to make that transition because they've been very focusing on developing their tech skills for so many years, and that's what they're great at. The problem is when you jump into a tech lead, staff engineer, or principal, or like the expectations are different. You're expected to collaborate more, you're expected to engage more, you're expected to grow people around you. All of these things, like first, it's about accepting that it's a different role, and it's okay to struggle a bit in the first months, or in the first year, because you're gonna have to develop those skills. The expectations are high, so that's the first struggle people have in actually accepting and letting go of just trying to do the same things as before and expecting the same results. So there's a lot of frustration there that we have to go through when people are making that transition. The second one, I mean, if you're looking more from the perspective or for people that have the skills but they're struggling to jump into the role, like because they don't have an opportunity or they're not sure how, from that perspective, the problem that they're struggling with, it's making their work visible. So a lot of people are very focused on growing, enabling people, supporting. There's a lot of I probably you heard about it. There is this glue work that you have people in the team doing, which usually turn out to be very good tech leads or in like engineering leaders. These glue roles are the ones that kind of keep the team cohesive and kind of do the work that it's in between. And so these people struggle a lot to make their work visible and to show the impact that they have on the team, as they are not focused on having one task that they drive forward and they deliver. It's really hard to pinpoint, and so this stops them from actually showing the value that they're bringing to the team and making the job into the next role, and actually proving like how impactful that work can be. So I just kind of gave you the two extremes, and like everybody has their own struggles based on the background. It's just important to meet people where they are and kind of address that. That's what I'm trying to do.
Okay, so the thing that immediately struck me there is those are two skills that you really build up in a consultancy. You see all the diversity of different things and how it involves people, and that it's not just cutting code. You have to talk to people, you have to do stakeholder management, you get involved in selling, you get involved in presenting, and that also then means you have to make your work visible, because you're going to present the client with a bill at the end of the day, and they want to know what you're doing and how they're getting value for money for it. So ironically, for what we've just said about the view that consultancy is not good, it sets you up quite nicely for all of that, doesn't it? So another thing you've been doing is helping people decide whether to pursue IC, so individual contributor role, so the staff principal, or a management role. What are the things that you see people struggle with there, and how do you advise them?
So I mean, it's a very common question that people bring mostly in coaching, and the reason is because I think they really like the first struggle that they have. It's not necessarily to decide which way to go, but to accept which way they want to go. So the reason that I'm saying this is because after we start jumping into the conversation, we start analyzing the different options that they are considering and how would they fit them. And very funny, 99% of the cases people already know where they want to go. And for me, it's really easy to see that objectively, because you can see which side they are talking more about, which side they are more excited, which one they are focusing on. But so the problem is, most of the time it's not about making the decision, it's about accepting that you want to go in that direction and start taking the steps. Because before you make the decision in this space, it's kind of your it's comfortable, it's like I want to move, but I don't have to go in any direction. I'm still thinking about it, I'm doing something but not really. So one thing that I've seen people struggling is that usually in 1 hour we figure out which way they want to go, but then starts the hard part. Okay, so how do I do it? And that's when the realization of, okay, I will have to put more effort into my soft skills, or I have to put more effort in making my work visible, which people seem to struggle with a lot. Like, I have to say this, I'm still surprised every day to see how much pushback there is from people. But I'm doing all of this work, can they just see it? Like, why do I have to do all of this effort? And I'm every day I'm surprised on how they annoyed they are every time I tell them this, that they have to kind of go this extra mile if they want to grow. And so I think kind of this is the process. Most of the time people know, and if they don't know, I basically help them to actually understand what are the actual expectations of the role. Because I think people sometimes have the wrong idea of what it means to continue as an individual contributor and what it means to grow into a certain tech lead. So once we start putting it down on paper, once they start looking at some definitions in their company, like job descriptions for those roles, things start to become a little bit clearer. It's like, I want to do this. No, I don't really want to do this. So it's a lot about getting clarity, and it's a lot about sometimes it's just about listening to people, so they have a way, like a space where they can vocalize their fears and their worries and their thoughts without being judged or stopped, or without the pressure of having to make a decision or expectation to go in one direction or the other, which usually is when you're talking with your manager or with your friends, or you should do that, you should do this. So I think that's the value that coaching brings. It's kind of this space, objective space, where you can just go and be yourself, without any expectation on which direction you need to go. And for that, people it just seems to do the trick.
Yeah, and on the making our work visible, and can't they just see all this great work I'm doing? I think that's really an example of the spotlight effect again, isn't it? We all think that everybody's looking at us, everyone's watching what we do, everyone's aware. And the reality is that your manager or whoever else that you think is looking at all your work and aware of every little detail of what you do, they're too busy running around having their own spotlight effect and worrying about whether their boss is looking at what they're doing or whether their customer is, and whether or not everyone's noticing all the mistakes they've made. So they're too busy worrying about all that, and whether their kids are ill or whether their dog's ill or whatever. They've got their own worries. They've got their own things that they're worrying about, and they're not as focused on us as we think. Mostly they're kind of oblivious to us, and it's not malicious. It's not because they don't care. Just they're too busy with their own worries and their own baggage to necessarily worry about everything we do. Interesting then that you said about accepting the role. So I wonder what you think of me, because I have started off as an individual contributor, was a lead within about a year. A year after that, I started my own company, so I was the big boss. It was my company. I funded it with the savings I had at the time. A couple of years after doing that, I went back to being an individual contributor, did that for about 18 months. Then I went contracting, and through various things of just opening my big mouth, ended up swinging into management, taking a perm role with the company I was at, grew to be VP engineering and executive in that company, then head of engineering, then back to a IC role, then back to a management role, then back to an IC role. So I've been back and forth. How does that fit with your idea of accepting? And where do you think I'm going wrong or right in that?
Okay, I'm gonna answer that with a question, because
Sure.
that's how I usually do it. Like, why do you think you've made all of these different transitions over the years?
It's been mostly out of necessity, because I am the kind of person that goes like, well, this is what we're trying to achieve with the business. This is what I believe the bottleneck is. How do I verify that that's a bottleneck? And then how do I go and, the story of a children's story of the dikes in Amsterdam where they leak and the kids stick their finger in it. I'm like, where do I need to go and stick my finger in to stop the ship from sinking and to stop the ground from flooding? And that's what I'll go and do. So I've tended to go, well, that's the hole that needs plugging. I'll go and do that thing.
Okay. So solution oriented and going more towards what exactly is we're trying to solve, or what needs to be done.
Yeah, what needs to be done really is the direction I tend to go.
Based on what you describe and what you've been chasing over these years, where do you think that fits better?
See, that's where I don't have an answer, because I like feeling that I'm doing the most useful thing.
Mm-hmm.
So at times in my career, that has meant stuffing envelopes and helping the marketing team. Back when marketing was stuffing envelopes, we needed to get a mail shot out to 10,000 people. 10,000 envelopes is a lot of stuff for the marketing director, so I went and helped. At times, it has been go and do sales, get on an airplane, fly half across the world, and go and sell to somebody. So I've done that. At times, it's been, we've got this issue to debug. Right, cool, I can do that. I'll get in and do that. So what I've enjoyed most is all those things. Is feeling that I'm doing the most important thing that I can usefully contribute to with the skills that I have.
Okay, and if that's been working for you, why do you need to answer the question?
I just thought it was interesting to see how you would approach that and what your thoughts are, because a lot of people feel that they have to pick one or the other and it's permanent. I mean, obviously, I agree it's not, because I have been back and forth, but there are downsides to that. It's certainly, if I wanted to go back to permanent employment with other people, it makes it a lot harder, because people look at your CV and say, well, are you a manager or are you an individual contributor? Where do you fit?
Okay, so I mean, I think there are different questions that we're going for here, right?
We don't have to address all of them. I just thought it was an interesting
No,
discussion.
it's very interesting. It's totally fine, right? Like I think that's the part of the acceptance. I think that's why I'm asking you, like, okay, why do you need to answer this question? Because it sounds like your strategy, it's been going on really well. You have your why and what you're chasing, and that's what they've been driving you over these years. And you don't really need to answer the question in order to move forward. If you would need to, like you said, going for a role, then there it's where you can get more clarity on, okay, why am I making the change? Where do I want to get? What do I want from this role? And that's like you can get clarity on. It can be money, it can be position, it can be visibility, and based on that you can adapt all the skills that you've been developing over the years to fit the role that you want to get into. The beauty is you can go on both based on all the other criteria that you need from that next change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So very much when you talk to people, you'd advise them to really think about their why. Then think about why they want to pursue that, what their goals
Yes,
are.
very important. I really try to don't advise people, at least when in coaching, like I was doing with you here, because you're trying to get my view. So it's very important in order for people to actually feel like it's their decision, to not be told exactly on, well, you should do this or you should do that. Or so it's a very much a conversation on, this is what I'm hearing, how does it sit with you, and people actually making their decisions and their kind of assumptions in order to go forward is the only way that works and that sticks. So that's the difference actually also from the like from mentoring, for example, where you would expect someone to guide you based on their particular experience.
Yeah, and that's another key point that so many people miss, that difference between mentoring and coaching. I speak to an awful lot of people that think mentoring and coaching is the same thing and don't really appreciate that with coaching, it's all about getting somebody to find their own solution, isn't it? Asking those questions. And as you just said, reflecting back to somebody what they've said and asking further clarifying questions. On that note, how important do you think the soft skills are for somebody who wants to progress from that mid-senior level? Is it more important, less important, equally as important as their technical skills?
I mean, I think soft skills are, in my opinion, way more important at any level you are. And the reason that I'm saying this is because I base my whole career and growing fast in focusing on people. I think that you cannot remove the human side from tech or from anywhere, and that's always going to pop up. So the reason that I'm saying this is because I've seen this at every step. Every time I focused on a technical problem, or for example, as a tech lead, a tech debt problem, or most of the time it wasn't a technical problem, it was a people problem. Like people would not get aligned, or it wasn't about even the technology. When you have these people fighting for different solutions, it's just if you start digging into and you're actually paying attention, there is like some internal conflict that they have between themselves. They don't agree on anything. It's not about the solution, or they have this background on a certain like tool and they're afraid to do the switch. So it's not about the tool. So the reason that I'm saying this is because I think if you put effort into your soft skills, you don't just become like a better engineer or leader. I think you become a better human, and being a better human, it would fit better and it will help you grow in any direction that you want to grow. And that means collaborating with people. That means like actually there is a vibe, I think, when you focus of people that you have. Like people just want to be close to you, they want to work with you, they reach out to you, they feel like you're available. And I think that just something at the end of the day, it makes you stand out, and that's going to help you grow if we're talking about growth in the direction of developing as a career wise. So yeah, that's my take, and that's what I based all my all my conversations on. But I think there are also different stages for when you're investing. When you're starting out, for example, I do understand, and I think there is a period where you have to invest in your technical skills, and that's totally fine. It's about that acceptance, because you have other people around you to take care of the rest of the things. But the moment when you grow, I think the moment when you get to senior, it's impossible to ignore it anymore. Like it's not just about the expectations around you are that you start growing people around you, that you start, I don't know, interviewing, that you start collaborating with other team, having ownership. So it's not just even a matter of wanting to grow in that direction, you have to. So it's kind of both ways, but it's always of a part of understanding, okay, where am I putting my efforts and how is that contribute or not to where do I want to get.
Yeah, I've in the last few years phrased it as if you want to get past mid-senior level, you cannot neglect soft skills. You have to start focusing, and they probably have to be the bigger part of your focus, because you've probably got to that mid-senior level based on your technical skills, and you've probably put a lot of effort into them. So if you want to progress, you've got to put most of your effort into the soft skills. So if somebody takes that message on board and wants to develop their soft skills, how can they go about that?
Well, my strategy is we start somewhere, anywhere. Usually, when people come to me to improve their soft skills, we start from a problem. I want to grow to the next level. For example, I feel like my voice is not listened in the meeting. I feel like my message is not getting across. So the reason that I'm saying it's the important thing is to identify one problem you're trying to solve and start from there, because this is how you also see the impact. So I want to get better at my communication. What does that mean? How would you know you will get there? If you cannot tie it to something concrete, to something that you would see an impact, you would see a result, then it's really hard to stay motivated in the process. So then, in order to improve, you have to find that problem on how you will know that you are getting better. That's how we usually start. The beauty and the pain of dealing with soft skills is that wherever you start, you're going to have an impact on all your soft skills. It's not like you can say, okay, now I'm working on my listening. This is it. It's just, I'm going to listen, because through listening, your empathy develops, through your collaboration develops, your ability to work with people goes in a different direction. Your feedback gets better, because if you're actually listening to what people are trying to tell you, then you can adapt your message to help them and fit what they're saying to you. So what I'm trying to say is that they come together. That's the messiness of a human. But in order to grow, you need that clarity on, okay, where am I starting? What problem am I solving? How do I know that I get there? And the continuous tracking of progress to actually feel like you're going forward. Because like I said, just improving my communication, it's not going to take you very far. Like, what does that mean, and there are ways and tools that I use in coaching that you can help people to define those metrics, to define those goals, and to define progress and what it means for them, so they can actually feel they're moving forward. But like I said, wherever you start, you'll see it's just kind of an effect, a butterfly effect, and it spreads everywhere. Like it's impossible not to be affected in all the different areas. Now the pain is that you cannot actually control how the change is gonna affect people around you. So I think that's the hardest part of the process. Like, in order to improve, you have to make a change. Now you cannot really control, mostly when we're talking about soft skills, on how that change is going to be perceived by people around you. So it's a matter of being courageous and taking that kind of shift and seeing how it's being perceived by people and adapting based on it. And people are like, yeah, but what if they explode? What if my manager get upset? Whatever. And I'm like, you're already in a point where you're blocked, right? That's always that's the trick for people. Is like, that's why you came to me, because this is not working what you're currently doing. So at least you're breaking the cycle, and we can see what works and what doesn't. Like, because there's nothing you can come up with that it's perfect, or you cannot control all the environment, because it's affecting people around you. It's not like in tech where, okay, I do this, I do that, I break the pipeline, I fix it, I revert. With people, it might take a little bit more to do those changes.
Yeah, and it's much harder to change other people, isn't it? With tech or with a pipeline, we can change it, we can fix it, we can go and apply some pressure and physically manipulate it. But people are very, very hard to change. And fundamentally, they won't change unless they want to. Whereas we have full control over ourselves, so we can improve our soft skills, we can develop whatever we're working on there. And if it doesn't fit with the environment, we also have that agency and that choice to change our environment. And it's far easier to say, well, I'm growing and I don't fit in this organization or this team, whatever, anymore. Part of that growth is I have to move out and find somewhere else to go back. And again, if you're in an environment where your growth threatens other people or is stifled by them, then it's time to change the environment, really, not hold back on your own growth because it's not going to fit that environment. I mean, that's easy for us to say, but it's unfortunately the reality, I think.
I mean, yeah, definitely it's a hard change, but I think at least starting to ask the questions: is it me, or is it the culture around that it's holding me back? On that note, just want to add something, because you talked about the environment. So even when it comes to making that work visible, one thing that I've seen sometimes is that it's not that you're not delivering or doing a valuable work. Is that what you define as valuable? It's not what people around you define as valuable. So that's a really big gap also that happens a lot. So it's not even about making your work valuable, it's that what you think people actually appreciate, it's not like what you define as quality, what you care about. It's not what your company, your people, your team cares about. And so then you're in the circle. You just keep doing more of the things that you think are important, and they are not seen because they are not valued by them. So that's another kind of, breakthrough that blocks people.
That really nicely ties us right the way back to where we started with the consultancy skills, because as you mentioned, by listening, improving your listening, you hear what other people are talking about, and you hear, when you really listen, what their worries are, what their hopes and dreams are, what the concerns are. And again, when you go and do a more sales focused role in a consultancy, you hear what the customer wants. You hear, they don't want, 50,000 lines of C++ or 2 million lines of Python. They have this pain point. They want that addressed. So when you really listen, and when you get experience of doing that in a consultancy role, you hear what problem they're trying to solve. And then you don't talk to them about, oh, well, a million lines of Python and we'll use this cool feature. And you say, oh, that was a pain. You were struggling to do X because of Y. This is what we're doing about Y, and it will enable you to be 50% better at X. So that's how we're going to solve it. Again, brings us nicely back to that, doesn't it? So
everything connects. It's with soft skills, I told you.
Yeah, it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? But it's always a people problem. Cool. Oh, thank you very much for your time today, Anemari. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to mention?
No, if it's one thing that I want people to take out of this, and based on our conversation, is just please put effort into making that work visible. It's just like I see the pain every day, but it's gonna help you greatly. Also on building your confidence and actually feeling like you're contributing. It's just such an amazing a tool that people are not using. So yeah, if it's one thing that people want to take out of it, it's the putting effort into making your work visible, just as much as you put into actually doing the work, hopefully.
Awesome. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Anemari.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the invite.